Richard McPherson, happy day. How are you, sir?
Happy day. Good cup of coffee. I appreciate being here.
Oh, God bless it. Okay, so we were going to do Chernobyl today. Excuse me. I was going to say Fukushima. We already did 3 Mile Island. We're going to do Chernobyl. We're going to hold Chernobyl to next week. A lot of people have asked me kind of your background, and it sounds like you've been getting the same questions about that. As more people have tuned in and realized, gosh, there's this whole story of American nuclear that we really have not ever heard, right? Like I didn't grow up understanding what the problem was with the nuclear industry or the real problem was. Right. I grew up understanding that like, 3 Mile Island, or like, these places blew up. Like I remember seeing documentaries on Chernobyl when I was in elementary school that was like, people going to, deal with the radiation and they were all dying. And I was like, oh my God, this is why we can't ever have nuclear. But in reality, the real problem was something different. But again, people have been tuning in and asking kind of who you are. So you're going to tell them.
Okay. It's simple.
It's simple.
I'm an old used guy.
I love cheeseburgers and strawberry milkshakes.
Yeah, well, I found out I can't live on them forever. So a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe, I finally, on my own, convinced myself to stop eating cheeseburgers and milkshakes. So I had done that for a lot of years.
They're so good.
So I've already lost 30 pounds, and I just got to keep going. And I don't take pills. I don't take these fads or go get something cut out of me. It's a mindset. There's things in life that you have to decide for yourself. And after 30 years plus of not paying attention to what I eat, I started paying attention to what I eat. It's as simple as that.
God bless it. So that's your dietary consumption. Talk to me about nuclear.
Okay, nuclear. So the easy answer is I've been a student of energy since 1957. However, I didn't know it until 1967. How did I become a student of energy? Pardon me. In 1957, my dad was stationed at Barbers Point Naval Air Station on Oahu. And he was flying three different kinds of airplanes. Well, they need gas. So I would notice these trucks come up and all this and that. So one day at home, I asked him, where does your gas come from for your airplanes? He said, well, it comes from a truck. And he said, you've seen them before. I said, okay, where do those trucks get their gas? He said, from a tank on the base at Barbers Point. I said, where do those tanks get their gas? And he said, from a pipeline that comes from either Pearl Harbor or downtown Honolulu. And there's tanks there. So I said, well, where do those tanks get their gas? So he drew me a one-line diagram that I really wish I had today. I'm going to duplicate it as much as I can. And this is what he drew me. But he drew me from Pearl Harbor and downtown Honolulu Harbor. He drew me ships coming over from both Los Angeles and San Francisco, tankers. He said there are tankers that get their fuel in either L.A. Harbor or in San Francisco area. And they get their fuel from tanks there. And those tanks get their fuel from refineries in California. So that's the first time that I realized the complexity of getting fuel to his airplane on Barbers Point. So I gave that a lot of thought. I didn't write a lot, but I thought about it. I started thinking about what it took to refine crude oil, what it took to pump it to tanks, then pump it out of tanks and pump it on ships, drive the ship over to Hawaii, offload the fuel and some other tanks, and then pump it in a pipeline to Barbers Point to their tanks. And then a truck would pull up and it would pick up fuel and they'd go fuel these airplanes. So then I got to thinking about piping systems, and I started thinking about pumps, and I started thinking about the complexity of this whole process. It led me into learning a little bit about pumps, a little bit about tanks, and a little bit about pipelines. And how far can I pump something? What's the friction loss, and what do I have to overcome, and all that. So then Dad got transferred back to California, and then he got transferred to Maryland, Patuxent River Naval Air Test Center. Well, now I needed a job. I'm in my last year of high school, and I needed a job. And a guy by the name of Bob Feaster owned Southern Maryland Oil Company. And he gave me a job delivering fuel oil. So back then, houses in Maryland were heated mostly. They had been heated with coal. Coal chutes were still in a lot of houses, like the house we lived in Maryland. But they had furnaces installed that burned oil. They either burned kerosene or fuel oil. And Bob had these trucks. And the trucks were divided up into tanks. And somebody would want kerosene or they would want fuel oil. 2 different products, 2 different prices, 2 different reels to deliver the fuel and put in these 400-gallon tanks. Now, we had to fill those trucks. Where did we fill those trucks? We drove down to Piney Point, Southern Maryland, and they had these big stations there that there were these overhead pipes. You would pull in, you'd bring down this overhead pipe, and you would either put in kerosene or you would put in fuel oil. And that was called Stewart Petroleum at Piney Point. And they had a lot of storage. They also had all kinds of things to do with fuel oil. So as it went on, as my time went on with Bob Feaster, he would get requests from time to time from the folks down at Stewart Petroleum to have one of his drivers drive these big trucks. Talking about a big tractor trailer with 6, 7, 8, 9,000 gallons of some liquid fuel in it. It could be gasoline, it could be kerosene, or it could be fuel oil. So I also did that. Bob Feaster also sold furnaces. So it came time to replace one, and he took me on the job with him, and he showed me how to replace a furnace, an oil furnace. He also showed me how to light it off the first time, how to tune it up so that you had the right air, fuel mixture, and all that. So I got a lot of learning during that couple of years. So then around comes late 63, and the guy I was working with at a shop where we were overhauling engines, he was 2 years ahead of me in high school, and he gets his draft notice. I could tell he was talking to a girl that had been in my class at Great Mills High School. So I picked up the phone and I kiddingly said, "When are you going to draft me?" She said, "Well, you dropped out of Maryland and we got a letter. And a letter comes from a university or college," which I didn't know at the time, "when you drop out to your local draft board. And your local draft board puts you to the head of the list." So she said, "In December, but you can't tell anybody that I told you that." Wait a minute. I'm going to be drafted in the Army in December? Like Buddy is being drafted in the Army now? So I go down to join the Army to be a helicopter pilot. They don't want me. Navy chief comes in the room, says, "Who's McPherson?" Well, growing up with my dad, I learned one of the things you do in the military is don't volunteer. So I didn't say anything. He said again, "Who's McPherson?" So I raised my hand. He said, "Get your clothes and come with me." We went in a little room, little desk, and he puts out this trifold. He said, "This is every program in the military, including naval aviation." And he said, "You qualify for every one of them except naval aviation. And you have to have a 4-year degree to go to flight school in the Navy." He said, "You see this line up here?" He said, "You're in the top 1% of all high school and college graduate, those tests you took, you're in the top 1% of all high school and college graduates in America." Well, nobody ever told me that before. So I was impressed. Well, he said, have you ever heard of Navy submarines and nuclear power? Yes. He said, sign here. That's almost the way it happened. So he wanted to meet my mom and dad. I go home that night, dinner time. My mom said, what'd you do today? I said, I joined the Navy. I'm going nuclear power and submarines. Now, mind you, my dad is a naval aviator. He's a naval officer. Been flying since 1942. This is 1963. And he said, almost under his breath, that's Admiral Rickover's program, and everybody fails out. Well, if he knows that as a naval aviator down here at Patuxent River, think how many other people knew it except for me. So suddenly I didn't feel very good. But I went ahead and took the enlistment, went to boot camp, went to some other schools, wound up in nuclear power school. I was fortunate that some officer that I still know today was one of the instructors there, helped me get through nuclear power school, the first phase of it. First is all about math and physics and all this other stuff. The second phase is all nuclear. The first phase, I almost failed it. The second phase, I almost aced it. So then at the end of the second phase, I was interviewed, and they wanted to know how come I did so poorly in the first 3 months, and I almost aced everything in the second 3 months. And I said, I don't know. I just did. So I go to prototype here in Idaho, A1W. They asked me to stay on as an instructor. I hated the chief that was in charge of us in the crew I was on. I wanted out of Idaho. He said, well, if you don't want to be an instructor, go to engineering laboratory technician school, which is like a nuclear chemist. I said, where is it? He said, it's right here in Idaho. I said, I don't want to go to it. He said, well, how about nuclear welding school? I says, where is it? He says, in San Diego. I says, I'll take it. That gets me out of Idaho. So I go to nuclear welding school. There's a number of things I didn't know about. My image was, if I get out of the Navy and I know how to weld, I can always get a job welding on trucks or something. I did not know how hard it was to certify as a nuclear welder. I was the second to the last one certified out of a class of 14. I was the 13th one certified, but I was certified. I also didn't know that every 3 months you have to recertify. So that got me interested in metallurgy, and that got me interested in welding, and that got me interested in destructive and non-destructive testing, which I pursued a lot of in the next few years. So I go to my first submarine, USS Stonewall Jackson. I was on the Blue Crew, SSBN 634 Blue. I made my first patrol out of Guam, and during that patrol I qualified as a lower-level engine room watch. It's a lonely, cold place. Nobody comes to visit, except the machinery watch supervisor or the engineering office of the watch. So I'm sitting there one day. Now, mind you, this is 1966. I'm sorry, I was on my second patrol, which was in early 1967. And 1967 is 10 years after I asked my dad that question about where do you get gas for your airplane. So I'm sitting down there in lower-level engine room, and suddenly dawned on me that I became a student of energy in 1957, 10 years before. What was the big difference in realization? Nuclear power school. Nuclear power school was very, very difficult. It's been rated as, back in those days, the equivalent of 5 years of engineering in 6 months.
God, that's a lot.
It comes fast.
Yeah.
But it also caused my natural inquisitiveness to start looking more at what is energy, what is oil, what is nuclear, what is coal, boilers, pumping it, doing this and that. I went all the way back to the early 1900s when oil was just making its debut in reality. And we were transferring from the use of wood to coal and some oil. And in about 1912, the Brits came up with a oil-fired boiler for their ships before the U.S. Navy did. So as I'm starting to look at all of this and the complexity of this, and thinking back to what I thought after I asked my dad about where does you get gas for your airplane, I started digging in deeper and deeper into energy. And I started looking at what does it make sense, what are the costs of energy? This is a complex system. I already learned that back in 1957 about you got to take crude oil, you got to pump it out of the ground, you got to take it to a refinery, you got a refinery that takes and has a slate of products, and one of them is fuel oil, jet fuel, aviation fuel, kerosene, etc. And so I started playing with the numbers just out of curiosity. Was not a required subject in nuclear power school. But that was really the starting of my looking at the numbers associated with energy. To make a long story short, I continued on that path for quite a number of years. And by 1968, I got in the mail-in list from the major oil companies for their annual reports. So I'm looking at them, and one of the things I discovered was, so I've got an annual report for 1967, and the annual report for 1967 says, we started the year with X amount of reserves, and then we used a bunch of reserves. However, at the end of the year, we found more reserves. So as they go into the next year, they had so much in the way of reserves. The next year they used so much. And then at the end of the year, they magically have found pretty much the equivalent of what they used that year. And this was happening each year. And I was also running their numbers by hand to see what did all this mean. So by 1968, I had a lot of knowledge, and I was starting to share it. So 1968 was the year that I point to when people ask me, when did you start writing or talking about energy and economic security? It was 1968. I've been doing that ever since. And natural gas came into play. Now, natural gas in the early years was a waste product. They just simply needed to get rid of it, so they flared a lot of it off. Then they found they could use it. So they put in all these piping systems around the country to pipe it all around the country, a good majority of it, to use in home heating, industrial heating, things like that. They started to make other usable products out of it for vehicles, compressed natural gas, things like that. Fast forward to me going to the International Atomic Energy Agency. I had access to all of their information. But at the same time, I was going back and reading and researching what had been done. We were just getting into petroleum use in vehicles when World War I hit. What did we do in World War I? We went to war, but we also taught a lot of men and women how to drive something, be it a car, be it a truck, be it a bulldozer, be it an airplane, be it a ship. And that was the big leap up in the use of oil, a liquid product to fuel all of them. Fast forward to World War II. Went to war in World War II. What did we do? We taught millions more how to drive a vehicle, drive a ship, fly an airplane. Lots more petroleum use. Lots more refineries. Lots more refineries that were turning out a slate of products that were used in thousands of things. I mean, today, oil is used in thousands of products. Natural gas is used in thousands of products, not the least of which is natural gas is used to help make fertilizer so that we can replenish the nutrients in the ground that had been lost by the way of our farming practices throughout the early half of the 1900s. So from time to time, somebody would ask me to come and give a talk, and that increased. And then people became more and more interested in what I was writing. Then, sometime in the late 60s, Admiral Rickover was asked a question, and I think it might have even been in front of Congress. So oil at the time, crude oil at the time, or oil that the Navy would buy at the time, was about $2 a barrel. Admiral Rickover said the delivered cost of oil is $55 a barrel. Well, I'd already been playing with those numbers and was getting into that we have a much higher cost of delivery than what is broadcast. We say crude oil today is $1 something a barrel. This is back in the 60s.
Sure.
Gasoline is $1.90 a barrel, and on and on and on. Rickover just said the delivered cost is $55 a barrel. So I started looking at what is that cost. Well, what is the cost? The government buys it. The Department of Defense buys it. The Department of the DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, buys it for $1.80. They stick it in a bunch of tanks or have people hold it in a bunch of tanks for them, and they pay for that storage. Then they pay for the delivery to go into tanks that belong to the Department of Defense. Then that gets pumped out and either down to a port that goes into a ship or go down to an airport that goes in an airplane, or replenishment at sea. All of our ships are fossil fueled. They're oil fueled. So during World War II, we built up a huge fleet of tankers that will go into a port, get loaded with fuel, then go to sea, and refuel all the ships at sea. That's a big cost. So I started uncovering what those costs were. Then I understood why Admiral Rickover said it's $55 a barrel delivered. So that started to make sense. And then I started getting involved in research activities officially. And one of the things that I really woke up to was when we went into Kuwait in 1989. Iraq goes and takes over Kuwait. Now we start sending people over there, equipment over there, and somebody told me that, well, the cost of delivery of a gallon of fuel to the battlefront is maybe $400 a gallon. Okay? Well, people have to drink water. So I raised the question. I said, what about water? What about it? I said, well, if we're delivering fuel to the battlefront and it's actually costing us $400 a barrel to get it there, a gallon rather, then we have the same cost for water. The guy told me at the first time was, no, we don't. That didn't make any sense to me. Well, the fact is, we pay the same amount to get water pretty much to the battlefront as we do fuel. Then along came 1999. In 1999, the Defense Science Board put out a report about fuels for the warfighter, and I was sent a copy to review. It was really eye-opening to see that all of the things that I'd been thinking about from 1957 to 1999, they'd put in a book. And the average cost of fuel delivered to the military, not to the battlefront, just the military, was $13 and some cents a gallon. That's not what they're paying on paper. So behind the scenes, these high costs of what it costs to really deliver, it's not being talked about because it's fragmented into so many different budget areas. that they deal with the Congress. But in reality, the Defense Science Board found out it was $13 and something a gallon. So ever since then, I've been talking about national security, domestic security, energy, and the combination of energy and economics as a security issue for the United States. Along the way, I started talking about electricity because I realized that our electricity was not protected. We have this electricity all over the country. It's not protected. It's not protected from electromagnetic pulse attack, cyber attacks, or physical attacks. Or, as we found out with a lot of people dying, it's not protected from freezing weather. It's not protected from typhoons or hurricanes or tornadoes. It's not protected from forest fires, and it's not protected from range fires, as we've been finding out a lot in recent years. Matter of fact, Pacific Gas and Electric out of San Francisco went bankrupt twice because of fires burning down their transmission lines. So there's a quick snapshot in time of how I became involved in a student, and my being so inquisitive led me by the late 1960s into talking about energy and economics as part of our security.
Good Lord, man. That's I will tell you one very surprising thing that, again, I'm just getting into the energy discussion with a lot of different people. One amazingly surprising thing is how much energy or attention is coming to energy all of a sudden. You know, myself included, falling backwards into it. But it's almost like the world is waking up to some degree to the fact that everything you're saying, that we have to transport this, that it's a critical part of our critical infrastructure, that we'd be donezo without it, that we need it for so many things. I had a hydrogen well gal on last week. Fantastic conversation. But again, trying to solve these problems of, no, we don't just need a little. We need everything, and we need everything we can throw at it. We need new science. We need proven science. We need to revitalize science. We need to do all of these different things to bring as much energy to the table as possible, because the winner of that race, the energy race, is going to win. It's going to hold all the cards at the end of the day.
And we don't have that much time to do it. So I have, over the years, I've put together, and I use credible sources because I'm incapable of spending enough time to do this. So today, 2025, there are 30 sources of power making electricity in the United States, starting with natural gas, solar, wind, coal, nuclear.
Yeah.
And it goes on down the list. 30 different power sources making electricity in the United States. We've got around 9,000 generators in the United States. And they're generating about 1.3 million megawatts a year of or 1.3 million megawatts to give us this electricity that we use during the year. However, there is solar, wind, and natural gas. All three are very vulnerable and high-risk sources from electromagnetic pulse, from cyber attacks, solar flares, etc. Today, pretty much 50% of our electricity in this country is generated by natural gas. And our natural gas pipelines that go throughout the country, along with stations that come above the surface of the ground, are at risk. And terrorists or just somebody who wants to can shut them off. So if you take those three sources, you take you take natural gas, you take wind and solar that are not only intermittent but highly vulnerable, you take just those three, and they represent a little bit, just about half of the electricity that's generated in this country. We could very rapidly, on any given day, lose 60% of the electricity in this country.
Yeah, man. I think I told you last week or the week prior that I'm connecting with somebody out of Intermountain Gas. Excuse me, because I don't know anything about the way they transport gas, but I know Idaho Power, I think, generates roughly 40% of their overall power in some way from gas. And to know that it's like, okay, so that pipeline, that's it. Like, and that's our power. Like, Idaho Power can't even do anything about it if that pipeline isn't supplying. So are we good? Like,
No.
What do we have in place? Do we have contingency plans? I mean, do we have, hardening of the systems? I mean,
No.
Well, I hope that's not the answer, man. That's why I asked this guy to come on.
So I got asked to come back to Washington, D.C. a couple of days after 9/11. And I was given a list of offices to go to where there were meetings. And the most interesting one was there was a meeting in process about energy. I stepped through the door, and I heard the term EMP. Well, if that's electromagnetic pulse, I'm in the right room. As I walked in to sit down among this probably 60 people, all in civilian clothes. So I don't know who they were or where they came from. My assumption is most of them were government, if not all. So the speaker behind him on the whiteboard, number 1 was electricity. Number 2 was water, and number 3 was nuclear power. And what they turned out to be, the discussion was, electricity actually was electricity, and telecommunications is one subject. The second subject was water, was potable water that we drink and use for everything, but also wastewater. That was really subject number 2. Number 3 was commercial nuclear power. At the time, we had about 104 nuclear power plants in our commercial fleet. Why nuclear power? Because they're designed better, they're manufactured better, they're operated better, they're maintained better, they are better secured, and they supplied over 20% of our electricity. So those 104 nuclear power plants out of 9,000 are really important. So that's why those 3 were listed as our top 3 critical infrastructures. That was in September of 2001. Today, not only our nuclear power plants aren't protected, but our entire electrical grid and distribution system is not protected. Our water supplies are not protected. Our wastewater supplies are not protected. We have a problem. Congress has known about this session after session after session of Congress. Whoever's been put in charge of the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, a year later, the Department of Homeland Security, they all know this. We've given them $21 trillion for security for the United States, more than that now. And do we have secure electricity? No. Do we have secure telecommunications? No. Do we have secure potable water? No. Do we have secure wastewater? No. Are our nuclear power plants secure? Nope. Nor are any of the other, what adds up to be about 9,000 plants that produce electricity and put it somehow into the grid or distribution system. But there's 30 different sources of power producing electricity. And as far as I know, not one of them is being addressed properly as to how important it is to this country. The first president that I've ever had in my lifetime that's done something about it is Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he had his Atoms for Peace speech in the United Nations on December the 8th, 1953. And he talked about exporting our atomic energy, nuclear energy, to other countries for peace and prosperity. We haven't done that for ourselves. And his offer was stopped, as was the progressing of commercial nuclear power technology-wise by the Soviet Union putting money in here to stop it, because they knew what America did in World War I. They knew what America did in World War II. They can't tolerate that. So we sit here today, and I sit here, and I expect any moment for us to lose electricity. When we have a blackout, which we have more often than people think, when we have a blackout, like the other day where we live, we had a few weeks ago, we had a blackout that lasted about 5 or 6 hours. But each time when we have a blackout, I'm wondering, is this local, regional, or national? 1965, probably before you were born. The Great Northeast Blackout. Canada, the United States, Northeast United States, New York, blacked out. I was in nuclear power school when that happened, so I started paying attention to that and the grid and the distribution systems. So that's when I transitioned from not just looking at power sources and what provided the power to those sources to generate electricity, but then I started looking at the North American grid and the distribution system. In 1969, there was a meeting that was going to be held in New York City about the 1965 Great American Blackout. I took leave from the Navy, paid my own way, and went to that meeting. I was amazed. I was impressed. Those people who were in that meeting said, here's what we're going to do. Here's the lessons that we've learned. So I knew we were in good hands. I won't talk about blackouts from 1965 to August of 2003. But there was a meeting that was held in Washington, D.C. that I was invited to. It was a day and a half. And it was about the grid, the North American grid. So I was one of probably only about 15 people there. And I raised a lot of questions because I told them, I said, I went to this first meeting in 1969, and I've been to several since. And really impressed with the people there and the knowledge they have. But they keep saying, here's what we're going to do. But it never gets done. So one of the guys who was there in the meeting, had been at some previous meetings I was in. He said, you got time to have a beer and a hamburger with me or something? I said, sure. So we went to a bar right around the corner. It was about a little bit after 4 in the afternoon. I think it was August the 3rd, I think, of 2003. I think that's what it was, sometime around it. So we're sitting there watching TV. We're talking, drinking a beer, eating a cheeseburger. And the lights flickered. We looked at each other. TV flickered. We just looked at each other. Probably saying to himself, just like I did, we just came from a meeting about this. A few minutes later, there's a break in the news that in Ohio, going up through Canada, we have a large blackout that's occurring. Came all the way through Canada, northeast United States. And now we have a North American blackout in 2003. Now, all these people over the years had said, here's what we're going to do. The day before, we'd just been in a meeting that people were questioning the fact that we've been talking and having lots of meetings, hundreds and hundreds of meetings over the years, and nothing has ever gotten done to harden our electrical supply and make it resilient. That was in 2003. 2003 and 2025 used to be about 22 years. We still haven't done anything.
Well, Richard, here's to getting something done.
Let's try to get something done.
Let's do it. Until next time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.